Oh my God. Oh, I'm getting old. Okay, let's talk about the Super Bowl. More specifically, let's talk about the Rams offense going up against the Bengals defense. Obviously, the main sticking point when talking about this game generally is going to be how are you going to cover Cooper Kupp? How are you going to handle Odell Beckham? How are you going to stop the run game? How are you going to stop Matthew Stafford from making just crazy, ridiculous throws all the time, which he's very capable of doing. But at least for me, I kind of want to look at this game from a more schematic perspective. You know, a top-down view of how these teams match up against one another in terms of concepts they call, in terms of adjustments that the defense makes for those concepts. You know, not just talking about individual players, but talking about how these players are deployed within their individual systems, because that's probably going to make a big difference in this game. When you look at the Rams offense, they don't do anything special. They don't do anything exotic. They kind of rely on these core concepts over and over and over again, and they just get into them in a lot of different, unique ways with formation and personnel groupings and obviously motion. It's not fancy shit, but it works every single week. And so today, what we're going to break down here, sitting at the Garden of the Gods in Caesar's Palace. And by the way, Caesars, thank you for literally letting me use your backyard to do a Super Bowl preview episode. This has been a wild week that I could never have imagined, but I'm thankful to be here. But, you know, while I'm sitting here and enjoying Pro Bowl weekend from Vegas and getting ready for Super Bowl weekend back home in about 5 or 6 days from now, I'm going to be talking about arguably the main pillar from a schematic standpoint of the Rams passing game, of Sean McVay's passing game, and that is flood concepts. They get into them in a million different ways. We've talked about them on this channel before. It is quite literally the foundation of how Sean McVay moves the ball through the air. That is not arguable. But the reason why I want to bring it up again today is that you're going to see it a lot in the Super Bowl because they do it every single game. And so I kind of want to explore, A, why does it work so well? And B, what are the Bengals going to do from a defensive perspective in order to at least try to control them? I can't guarantee that they'll be able to completely shut it down, but if they can stop these flood concepts, especially off play action, and especially with some of the wrinkles they add into it, the Bengals defense has a very good chance of limiting what the Rams can do. Not guaranteed, but it's possible. So with that being said, I won't delay any longer. Let's get into this film. When we talk about flood concepts, it's a very general term, kind of like how whiskey is a general term and scotch is a type of whiskey. Flood concepts, for many coaches, just refer to any three-level route distribution to one side of the field with a deep option as the alert, a mid-level option, which is typically a corner route or an over route from the other side of the field if it's a weak side flood call, and you'll also get some kind of check down option in the flat or in the short hook area depending on the type of defense you're seeing. A sail concept, for instance, is probably the most common type of flood that you'll see on a weekly basis. The depth of each level and the type of route for each level of the flood can vary as well depending on splits, formations, personnel groupings, different types of fakes, what have you. For instance, on the play you're seeing here, some people call this version of flood super sail because it's basically just a deeper version of a sail concept down the field, and you've got a tight end as the outlet in the flat after he gives some chip help in protection. But the point is that all of these different variations of the concept all fall under the flood family, if you will. They all basically accomplish the same thing, which is a three-level vertical stretch on a defense. They just accomplish it in different ways. Now, flood concepts themselves are not exactly a new thing. They've been around in football for as long as the forward pass has, basically, and literally every team in the NFL runs their own versions of them. But the Rams do seem to run them more than anyone else, just by tendency. Sean McVay loves them because his quarterback, Matthew Stafford, has such a ridiculous arm that he can make every throw at every level of this concept at any given time. And not only that, but if we go back to that Super Sail clip really quick, Stafford is also very good at progressing to and throwing the dig route that McVay loves to pair with this concept from the backside as well. If you follow Seth Galina from PFF at all, he's been extolling the virtues of the backside dig in this concept all season long, so if you want to get even more detail on it, you can go to him. But the short version is that, by design, if a defense overplays the flood on the front side with a 3/2 or a 4/3, there's almost always going to be a big void in the intermediate middle of the field. So as long as you have an X receiver on the backside of this concept that can win his one-on-one matchup, which the Rams do, that route is pretty much free money for Stafford. They hit it all the time, or at least tried to hit it all the time, with a variety of different receivers from a variety of different alignments, and it's one of the pillars of their passing game, actually. So when you're watching the game this Sunday, I want you to keep an eye out for it because you are likely going to see it, and odds are Odell will catch at least one of these backside digs for a big gain in a gotta-have-it situation. Now, what you may or may not see are some of the other curveballs that McVay can and will dial up after calling floods multiple times, because as a play caller, he does like to lull defenses into a false sense of security against things that look like a typical flood, only for him to then come back with a concept to win over the top. Take this sequence from Week 3 against Tampa Bay, for instance. Late in the first half, the Bucs are playing a 2-deep fire zone coverage and bringing the nickel off the edge as a 5th rusher, which results post-snap in playing 4 defenders over 3 receivers against the flood. And like I mentioned earlier, if you do commit that heavily to swallowing up the front side of the concept, usually that means there is going to be a big void in the middle for Stafford to exploit with the dig on the backside. The safety was late to nail down on the route, of course, so Van Jefferson made an easy catch on the dig, and this was a huge first down where the Rams would only score a few plays later to take a lead going into halftime. And by the way, LA was also going to get the ball back to start the third quarter, which gave McVay the perfect opportunity to pay off that first flood concept by calling another play that looks almost exactly like it, but really isn't. 3 plays after that touchdown late in the second quarter, they're faced with another long yardage situation on the opening drive of the second half, and the Bucs already know that a flood concept is likely coming front side from this 3-by-1 look. They get into a match quarters defense in order to guarantee that they get 4 defenders against 3 receivers on that side to handle the flood. And as a byproduct of that match quarters call on the backside, the weak side safety is playing very tight and inside in order to nail down on the backside dig that they expect here from Deshaun Jackson. So theoretically, the Bucs should have all of their bases covered here. However, unbeknownst to Tampa Bay, the Rams aren't really interested in hitting the deep 7 route on the flood or the backside dig to get a first down here, and they actually want a touchdown out of this on 3rd and 10. And because they know that this backside safety will be nailing down hard on the dig this time because he played it way too soft the last time, the Rams want to take advantage of that aggression. So in order to do that, Jackson is not actually going to run the dig route here, and in fact, he's just slightly nodding inside and rolling his shoulders towards Stafford just to make it seem like he's breaking in on the dig, which then will get the safety to bite down on it, only to then immediately take off on the 9 route for an easy, and I mean easy, 75-yard touchdown. Looking at this matchup, it's not just the flood concepts that the Bengals need to be worried about, it's also all the stuff that McVay will call after those flood calls are successful, because once the Rams start to get rolling and Stafford is in rhythm, and McVay can just start sequencing plays together that all look the same but aren't, that's when the Rams are always at their most dangerous. Alright, so I hope this was a really good refresher so far on how flood concepts work, how the Rams kind of use a lot of different dirty tricks to disguise them when they want to run them, whether it's with formation, personnel grouping, motion, you get the idea. There's a lot of different ways to make a not very complex concept seem complex. So really, the question at the end of the day is, how do the Bengals handle this? Well, I do have some theories in terms of how they could, or rather how they should handle it, coming from the defensive schematic side of the ball. But before we dive into all of that tape from the defensive side of this matchup and the schematics behind handling flood or sail or whatever the hell you want to call it, again, I want to thank my sponsor for this week, Caesars Sportsbook. I could not be more grateful that they allowed me to use this space to record this episode. It's been an amazing day, an amazing week. It's just been awesome. And remember, if you are coming into town for the game, or if you live in a state with sports betting, you can use the link at the description below, and any first-time deposit on Caesars Sportsbook, you'll get a free Film Room hoodie of your choice. And even if I don't have a play in the store right now that you want, maybe it's a team that I don't have yet, or just a play for your favorite team that I don't have yet, Again, if you just include a screenshot and send it to the email on the screen right now, send me a screenshot of your deposit or send it to me on social, whatever's easiest for you, and you can request whatever play you want and I will make it for you and you get it for free. So again, thank you to Caesars for sponsoring me and thank you for letting me use their backyard. It's been awesome. So without further ado, let's get into this film and talk a little bit about the Bengals defense. Let's start by looking at a couple of examples of how the Bengals have handled, or rather not handled, flood in the past. And then I'll show you an example from Kirby Smart's defense down at Georgia that I really like for how they handle flood from 3-by-1 looks. Because if I were the Bengals defense this week, I probably would be trying to do the exact same thing that Georgia does because they're really good at it. So let's first take a look at the first half of the AFC Championship game a couple weeks ago on one of the Chiefs' 3 touchdown drives of the half. This was a 1st and 10 from near midfield, and the Chiefs are using jet motion at the snap with Tyreek Hill to get into their version of a type of flood concept that some coaches know as X angle. And on X angle, obviously you have the X receiver running a deep 7 route with an angled stem to 20 yards before he breaks to the outside. And then underneath that, you have Travis Kelce faking an over route before breaking hard and flat back to the outside as the mid-level threat, while Tyreek Hill is the check down threat in the flat off of that jet motion. The Bengals defense, at least to me, looks like it's in cover 1 rat, so you've got man coverage on the X, man coverage on the tight ends, man coverage on the Z, which is Hill, and the linebackers are banjoing the running back in the backfield and just kind of waiting for him to declare which side he's running to so that they know who has to cover him. Though, to be fair, it does seem like the backers kind of busted a bit on that part, but it ends up not mattering anyway. The thing to understand about trying to stop flood from man coverage, though, is that unless you have an absolute stud man coverage defender against their mid-level threat, who typically will be the best route runner of the group, you're probably going to lose. Stopping this concept is so leverage dependent that if you allow yourself to lose leverage and bite too early, like Mike Hilton does here against Travis Kelce, you're going to be in for a long day no matter what. It's much easier to stop this kind of play if you allow the slot defender to just be hard leverage to the outside and just kind of have some help waiting for him on the inside, rather than asking him to just be straight up man-to-man with no help. It's way too hard of an assignment against a two-way go, especially against a guy like Kelce, so if the Bengals could avoid leaving him alone out there again versus, let's say Cooper Kupp, that would be ideal for them. Now, let's rewind back to week 9 against the Browns, who also run a metric shit ton of flood concepts because that is also their bread and butter, and we'll see how Cincy handled it back then. Again, it's 1st and 10, almost the exact same area of the field as the Kansas City play, and even the play design itself is sort of similar to the X angle that KC ran, but this time it's a corner post, not a corner route. And because the second level threat is actually coming on an over route from the other side of the field, this is what's called weak side flood by some coaches, especially coaches that still use the old Sid Gilman terminology from back in the 60s. And of course, on top of all that, you also have the check down threat underneath with the tight end in the flat. Now, in terms of coverage here, the Bengals are in a 6-1 front on the line of scrimmage, meaning 6 bodies on the line and 1 linebacker on the second level. Vic Fangio calls this tilt, by the way. And then on the back end, since he is in a match quarters coverage look against a 2x2 formation, which if you subscribe to Nick Saban terminology is cover 7 mod. So the rules generally with 7 mod are the boundary side corner is staying over the top of the number 1 receiver to his side, and in essence he's taken the deepest outside threat. Mod stands for man on demand, so he's just in man on this number 1, unless the number 1 goes underneath within the first 5 yards, in which case he'll just zone off to a deep quarter. The boundary side safety is first keying on the number 2 receiver to his side, and if that threat goes underneath, either inside or outside, he just stays on the number 1 and helps the corner bracket him. The outside linebackers are responsible for rerouting the number 2 receivers on each side and then taking the first threats to their flats, so they need to be communicating with the Mike linebacker and the safeties on whether that's going to be a running back on a flare route or just a tight end on an arrow route like we see here. The field side corner and field side safety are also basically playing this the same way as the boundary side, so in the event that they only get 1 deep receiver, the safety will cut him if he goes inside, and the corner will stick on him from outside leverage if he goes outside. And finally, of course, the Mike linebacker is either matching the running back in coverage, or if the back stays in protection, he's just walling off crossers that come over the short middle of the field. That is essentially basic 7 mod coverage rules from this front and personnel grouping, so to speak. If you want to know more about it, every resource you can possibly imagine is over on the Coach Vast Patreon, linked in the description below. So go check that out if you want to learn more match zone coverages from someone who is orders of magnitude smarter than I am. But anyway, theoretically, basic cover 7 should be okay against many different route concepts, but in a lot of ways it can also struggle against flood when it's run out of 2x2 looks like the one we see here, because safeties sometimes have trouble keeping track of who they should be nailing down on and who they should be bracketing deep. 8 times out of 10 they'll be okay, but when motion and play action are involved and everything is moving really fast, sometimes players make mistakes and things go catastrophically wrong. And unfortunately on this play, this was one of those times where something went catastrophically wrong. I know that people like to shit on Eli Apple for a variety of reasons, by the way, but believe me when I say that this touchdown was not his fault. Again, according to basic match coverage rules, with only one deep threat to his side, he was expecting help inside and over the top from this boundary side safety, Von Bell. He overplayed the nod on the corner route specifically because he was expecting that help. But instead of bracketing that deep post like he was supposed to, Bell busted his assignment and tried to cut the over route that was already being cut by Jesse Bates, so Apple was completely hung out to dry on the post from DPJ for a 60-yard touchdown. Again, I'm not saying that Apple is completely blameless all the time in terms of catches given up, but at least in this instance, the bust against Flood that resulted in a score was not on him. With all that being said though, seeing Cincy struggle against these kinds of concepts does bring up an interesting question since they're about to play against a team that runs things like this all the time. What exactly should they do about it? Well, at least in my opinion, I would look to inspiration from one of the very best defensive coaches at any level of the sport, Kirby Smart. In particular, I would run a trips alignment from match quarters that both Smart and his mentor, Nick Saban, both love to run when they see a 3x1 look, and that trips adjustment is called Buster. In Buster, and I'll use this example from the SEC Championship game a few years ago, it is still in the match quarters family of coverages, but with a completely different set of rules to the trip side in order to handle different route concepts like sail that tend to abuse some really bad leverage disadvantages that come with basic cover 7 looks. So here's how it all works. The outside corner will play off coverage from inside leverage, and he'll carry the vertical of the number 1 receiver until about 18 yards past the line of scrimmage, at which point he will pass off that vertical threat to the safety, who's playing a deep half technique. That's the same technique that you see safeties play in basic cover 2 zone, so there's a little bit less thinking per se involved with the safeties here. And the reason why Buster calls have the outside corner pass off those vertical routes down the boundary, by the way, is because typically from a 3x1 look, those vertical routes are only serving the purpose of clearing out the coverage over the top, so that another receiver can slip underneath in the intermediate area at the sideline, i.e. what you see in sail concepts. So with the other corner peeling off the vertical and then sitting at an 18-yard depth at the boundary, it gives you an extra body with good leverage that can make a play on that intermediate threat. Now, conversely, the slot defender will be playing the number 2 receiver from heavy inside leverage so that he can cut off any inside breaks, and he's not worried about losing outside on anything like those 7 routes in sail because, again, he's got help from that outside corner. Think of it like a quasi-bracket on the primary receiver in the concept without actually being a bracket, so to speak. When it comes to the number 3 receiver, that defender will be playing it again from heavy outside leverage, and he's not afraid of getting beat deep or inside either because the boundary side safety is keying on that number 3 to bracket him if he goes vertical too. And then if he doesn't go vertical, that same boundary side safety is then allowed to come down and rob the number 1 receiver to his side if that receiver runs, a backside dig route. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And by the way, Bama is running one of their variations of a sail concept here, though it's a bit different because it's the number 3 receiver running a deep 7 instead of the number 2, but overall the coverage distribution ends up being about the same here anyway, so I'll just let it roll and you can see what I mean with all of this. Right as Tua hits the top of his drop, you've got a corner over the top of the 9 route and a deep half safety, so throwing that would be pretty much suicide. The snag out from the number 2 is technically there, but not by much, and if he missed it inside even by a little bit, that could easily be a pick six, so it's not a smart throw there either. And the deep 7 is probably also dead in the water because the coverage player is allowed to just slide underneath the receiver from inside leverage, so he is not threatened at all. Plus, on the backside dig, the boundary safety is just sitting on it and begging Tua to try to throw it so that he can go turn the receiver into a fine pink mist, so that's likely out as well. By the time Tua avoids some pressure and gets back on platform, the situation is even more dire. The corner peeled off that 9 route and is now sitting on the deep 7 as a bracket. The snag out is blanketed, the 9 route is capped by the safety, the backside dig is covered up, and so is the running back on the wheel route. There is literally nowhere to go with this ball, so Tua finally just admits defeat and he tries to throw it away, though weirdly he almost gets picked off while doing that anyway, but that's a topic for another day, I guess. My point here, though, is that Buster is a really good quarters adjustment against teams that like intermediate passes outside the numbers, which the Rams do a lot, because it doesn't ask the safeties to do too much, and it gives leverage help to the nickel, who usually needs all the help they can get. I think if the Bengals pull out something similar to this coverage on Sunday, or at least anything close at all, it actually could end up making a huge, huge difference in this game. Okay, so there you have it. I hope you learned a little bit today about how the Rams offense functions, maybe a little bit about how the defense for the Bengals functions, how they match up against one another from a schematic perspective. I'm still not entirely sure who is going to get the best of who in this matchup because it is incredibly close. They both have their own strengths and weaknesses. But what I do know is that you are going to see a lot of flood concepts called in this game, like you do for every Rams game, really. And one of the key linchpins in terms of determining who is going to win the Super Bowl is how the Bengals handle that concept. So hope you guys enjoy the game. Hope you have a wonderful Super Bowl Sunday. Hang out with your friends and family. It's been a true blessing this season. I've done more this year than I anticipated I would. I've traveled the country. I've gone to games in a whole bunch of stadiums. I've met a bunch of you. It's been a hell of a ride, to put it mildly. And this is the best job in the world because of you guys, because of the community, because of every ounce of support you guys give me along the way. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The best part about this job is that I can be anywhere in the country. And if I'm alone and I want somebody to grab dinner with, I put out one tweet and within an hour, I've got 4 people filling a dinner table that don't know each other. And we're sitting around for hours. I mean, literally hours talking about football. And shout out to Billy and Bill and Brandon, everybody that showed up. Like I had a last minute cancellation. I didn't have anyone to go to dinner with in a city that I don't know anybody. And because of this community, I feel like I know somebody everywhere that I can go share a meal with and you know, crack jokes and talk shit and just be friends with. So this really is the best job in the world because of you guys and because of everything that you've given to me over the years. This has been the best football season of my life by far. And it's not because the games were any better than normal. It's not because anything crazy happened in the league. It's because of the community. So thank you once again for allowing me to do this for a job and allowing me to have experiences like this one. I only hope that I can put out the content over the years that justifies your support of me and allowing me to do this shit, because nobody deserves this life. It's been a wild ride. So once again, thank you all of you for making this happen. I'll see you all back here I think next week for the start of what should be a pretty insane draft season. This is one of the biggest, most talented draft classes I've ever seen, and I've been covering the draft for a long time. So yeah, buckle up. It's going to be a long 3 months talking about the draft. Thank you once again to everybody who stayed this long in the video. I didn't plan on saying everything I did, but I felt like I needed to. It's been a hell of a season. Thank you all. Cheers.